So this is part 1 of my testimony, the dark night of the soul. Someone asked me, how do I know if I'm in the wilderness? I thought this would be an easy question to answer. I would just provide a link to an article or video teaching by someone else on this subject. But when I tried to find one, nothing was suitable, nothing was clear, nothing provided a suitable reason as to why God would put us through such a horrendous and extensive period of tribulation. A cheap, flippant Christian cliche was not acceptable for such a complex and extremely painful time when God all but withdraws from us. The wilderness comes across as a time when God does everything to us that the Bible says he will actually rescue us from. Why does God forsake us? Isn't that contrary to what God says he is? Does God not say that he is love, that he accepts us as we are, that he will gather us in his arms as a hen does its chicks, that we are the apple of his eye? Don't expect to meet this God when we are in the wilderness. No, in the wilderness, we see the God of Israel who dealt with his rebellious people along their wilderness sojourn. A hard God who disciplines his people harshly with no grace for mistakes. But why does God take some through this harsh wilderness and others he blesses with all the blessings of heaven? And what does it even look like to be in the wilderness? If I were asking these questions, I would want them to come from someone who had not only been through the wilderness, but had come out the other side. I don't want some theologian's opinion that treats the experience with flippancy or with condemnation, as though it is a light thing to experience the painful process of the wilderness, and as though it is only afflicted upon the sinful deserving among God's people. Because that's just not true. And so I will share in a very condensed form my wilderness experience. But please remember, there will be variations for how each person goes through, as it depends very much on our individual circumstances. So my testimony is only meant to be a guide and to help bring revelation. My conversion happened in 1988. I went straight into the dark night of the soul. Now, what is the dark night of the soul? It's being described as the wilderness experience on steroids. So it is the wilderness distress times 100. I attended a church where I always sat quietly. I did not serve in any capacity. I came, sat, and went home. I was not vocal. I went to a Bible study group for 2 years before I really started to contribute. During this time, I became the special target of a woman at the church who I would much later understand had a very powerful Jezebel spirit. She would accuse me and confuse me, and as a young convert, I didn't know how to process that. But she seemed to have a lot of spiritual wisdom. I didn't have a lot to do with her personally, but she would ring me early in the morning, always waking me up out of sleep. And before my mind was properly awake, she would bombard me with subtle spiritual confusions that I never really understood. Eventually, I stopped answering the phone and started avoiding her. But that wasn't enough for her. So then she found another way to attack me. She filed false accusations against me and took it to court within the Uniting Church. Now, this process went on for years. It caused me great distress and nightmares. As I said, I was a new convert, and I had a really severe and challenging childhood. So I wasn't necessarily mentally up to handling this. So this process went on for many years. It caused me great distress and nightmares. And when it was eventually resolved, it was simply thrown out. And I was told by an elder at the church, just as a throwaway line one day when she bothered to remember to let me know. I had never been allowed to attend any of the meetings or the case, and to this day, I still do not know what the accusations were. During this process, the leadership at the church was trying to figure out what was going on between this woman and myself, and they came up with this conclusion that my husband must have been having an affair with this woman. That's how they made sense of it, because they were not spiritual people. But it was just another false accusation that we had to live with. We challenged them. I don't know if they ever accepted it, but that's how it was. So not long after this, we got a new minister, and he was a spiritual man. I had written a book, and I asked him to look over it for me. His wife and another woman at the church plagiarized it blatantly and openly. We would go to bi-monthly women's meetings for the district where these two women were in leadership, and they would read straight from my book, word for word. They didn't even try to hide the source. They didn't even bat an eyelid at me, and I would have to sit there and take it. Apart from the fact I had no voice in those days to defend myself, I did consider that it was at least a good thing that the words were getting out, regardless of who said it and who got the praise for it. And I did see them getting the praise for it. Again, I went to do a counselling course with a very well-respected international healing ministry. I honoured this ministry so much. I think I even loved them. I really bore them in my heart. I had used their books to heal a lot of deep woundings in me, and it had been so successful that I really respected their ministry. I heard that they had started courses in Australia, and so I signed up. It was a 3-week live-in course, and the one that I had booked into was only the second time that the Australian team had run the course. Now, many things went wrong with this particular course, this particular one, as they tried to iron out really severe problems within their own ministry team. It was so bad that they knew that they were going to have to account to the head office for the mess they were in. And so they looked for a scapegoat, and I was it. I was so badly ostracised, excluded, and excused, I was treated like a leper. The whole leadership came to my room one day to accuse me of starting trouble and of having ruined the whole course. I ran out of the room straight to the phone to ring my husband to come get me. I don't even know why me. I was the quiet one. I don't even know how I got into that position. It was so bad. It was so bad. I thought I was literally going to die from the emotional pain. But they decided to talk me into staying. There was only 2 days left anyway. And the main leader gave me this very weak apology with the excuse that she was going through menopause. When I returned home from the course, the one and only friend that I had at my church, who I had seen as a mentor, refused to speak to me. I rang her and she just refused to speak to me. She gave me no reason why. She never spoke to me again until after I'd left the church and we'd moved to another state. And then for some reason, she started sending me birthday cards. That whole experience affected me so deeply because I had so trusted this ministry. I believed that they were who they said they were. But after this, I couldn't even come out of my house for such a long time. I just didn't trust people to be kind to me. I did write to their head office about my ill treatment, but I really didn't get any kind of satisfactory answer. Now, during all of this time, over this period of time, there were many false starts. That's when it looks like you are coming out of the wilderness and things are turning around finally, and God is about to start pouring his favor on you. And then just when it looks all good, the rug gets pulled out from under you again, and you find yourself as far back into the wilderness as you ever were. Now, one of these occasions was there was a very powerful man of God who was very respected, who came to our church to teach on healing. That was his ministry. He had a national ministry teaching about healing. Now, he pulled me aside one day and he told me that God had shown him the glory on me, and he invited me to join his ministry. I went through all the processes of being interviewed and accepted by his board, and I received an official letter of acceptance to his ministry. And I thought, finally things are turning around for me. I was so excited to be doing something rather than just sitting in my room, always just praying, worshiping, and reading the Bible. But it was only to hardly ever hear from him again. And once again, no explanation was ever given. No situation had ever occurred because he lived in another state anyway. And the last times that we had spoken were pleasant, but that was it. Now, I stayed at that church for just under 12 years. I wanted to leave, but God wouldn't release me. My husband eventually became an elder there, but I was very much excluded, and I stopped going to the Bible study because the woman who'd taken me to court within the Uniting Church was attending there, and it was horrendous. I just couldn't go. So finally we left that church, and we left because God was moving us, and he moved us 800 kilometres away. When I did leave that church, there was no one to say goodbye. In Melbourne, we went to a church, and even though once again I was still experiencing all the usual things, I was excluded from almost everything, I still remember that church fondly. And it had a lot to do with the fact that I liked them. Even though they didn't care for me much, I really liked them and respected them. My husband became an elder there after a year and was respected by the leadership and included, but as the wife of the elder, I still wasn't included. It was a church of about 70 to 80 people. There was a core group of women who were wives of the leadership, and they had their intercessory group and other groups and their ladies' luncheons and etc., but I was never invited. I begged for over a year to be on their worship team, which was such a good worship team. And finally, they let me be on the roster as one of the backing singers, and I loved it. Also, for a few months, my husband and I took the oversight of the young adults group. It was only to be for an interim period, I think, while the leaders were away or something. But we did that, and I loved that also. And this also could have been one of the reasons why I enjoyed being at the church, because of those two things. I just love serving. It was also the time of the Toronto blessing, and God was turning up in churches. So it was a blessed time. But my personal life behind all of that was never worse. It was dreadful. During the time at this church, God stripped us of everything: job, money, house, all material things, as well as our health, both of our healths. My husband blew his back at work and was bedridden. He eventually had to have quite a serious operation. I developed Graves' disease, which can kill, and very nearly did kill me. But at the 11th hour, God healed me. He healed us both. He gave my husband the best outcome you could have for his operation, because many have had that same operation and they've been worse off. But he has not been limited basically in anything he's been able to do from that day. The only thing is our poor son had to live through all of this with us and suffered greatly for us. It was terrible to see his pain and not be able to do anything to relieve it for him. And we didn't have family living anywhere near us that could assist. So from there, we moved again and we moved house again. And so we had to start at another church. This was to be my worst church experience ever. Due to circumstances, we weren't to find out how bad this church was until we had been there for about 3 or 4 months. The leadership had been absent for the church during this time, and so clarity wasn't really there. And by the time that they returned, we'd attracted a group of new converts around us. Now, they'd gotten saved by this church, but they were being ignored and they were stumbling badly. The Toronto Blessing was still going, but there were excesses happening in this church. It was a Kundalini spirit, but we hadn't heard of any of that. Not at that point in time. We just sensed that it was over the top and there were some strange things happening. There was a lot of manipulation of these converts, particularly around money. Money was being taken from them and items being removed from their homes. And these new converts were baffled. It wasn't their expectation of what church would be. And they were coming to my husband and I, they were coming automatically, I think, because they sensed its stability. And we were doing our best to answer their questions. And they were confused. So we approached the leadership to ask if we could run a Bible study group to help support them. And that's where everything hit the fan. I think they felt threatened by it. We weren't going to be doing anything harmful against the leadership. We just wanted to give them the basic of Christian, foundational principles. That's all. But they went ballistic on me. I was cut off from the new converts and forced out of the church in the most horrendous way. There was a lot of spiritual attack, a lot of demonic attacks against me, and then they gathered all the new converts together to pray against us. This was the first time that we'd ever been aware of the possibility of a curse being placed on you by Christians. So I left with my tail between my legs, and this was the second time that I was so scared to leave my house because of the unkindness of people. We learned later more about this church and how deeply, it bordered on deception and cultishness. And we learned how deeply Christians can fall into deception. Now, this all happened over a 10-year period, and this is the abridged version. Of course, many other things happened, but I don't have time to go into all of that. Where was God in all of this? His protection, his favour, his shelter. During this same 10-year period, I was spending an average of 9 hours a day in face-to-face devotionals with God. If anyone was positioning themselves for these things, I was. I worshipped and worshipped. I studied my Bible. I prayed faithfully, especially for those who were persecuting me. But I could not get God's hand to move on my behalf. I could not get a breakthrough. I could not find his favour. After we were kicked out of this church, no other door opened for us. We pushed and pushed. We tried so many churches, and they all openly rejected us, and some for the most crazy reasons. It was always the pastors who told us they didn't want us there. One pastor said we didn't fit into his demographic. And when a pastor tells you that, you can't go back. When a pastor says you aren't one of us, you can't go back. Another told us to keep our son away from his daughter, which was hysterical. Our son was 11 years old at the time. He was very, very shy and reserved, just like his mother, you know. And what can you do with that? You can't do with that when they see you as defiling them. And another pastor, we said, see you next week, when we were at the door shaking his hands to leave, and he said, no, we won't. That was it, after only 3 visits to his church. We did like another pastor at a small church, and we thought, oh, we could support him. So we decided that this was a church for us, and the day that we turned up to declare our membership, he announced he'd resigned and was moving 2,000 kilometres away. So God was shutting the door on us going to church, and we just couldn't push it open. It was not what I wanted. Even though the church had been so grossly mean to me, I still hoped that there would be a place for me there. But God had other plans. I finally got the message that a door wasn't going to open at any church. I resigned myself to that fact. As soon as I did, my dark night of the soul finished. But I only came up for breath just long enough to go back down into my wilderness experience. And that was to last for another 20 years. And I'll talk about that in the next video.